UH Kauhale, our UH community of students, staff, and faculty. And these events have been made possible by the Lā Honua Earth Day Committee, and of course, Keaholua STEM Scholars Program at UH Hilo. The theme for the Lā Honua Symposium is Wānana I Ka Mauliola, Projecting and Manifesting a Thriving Earth. The session you're in right now is Climate Change in the Pacific and is presented by Keaholua STEM Scholar students. My name is Darian, and I'm serving as one of your moderators for this session with the assistance and support of Nalu and Anya. This session is scheduled to run until 1:15 p.m., and we ask that you try your best to remain in this session until it ends. If you must leave early, you may do so, but please do as discreetly as possible. If you have any questions or feedback during this session, feel free to use the chat, and Anya will post them to the presenters. We request that in order to see our presenters and slides, we'd like for you folks to click on the view screen on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if you're clicked in gallery mode, please click to, I think it's presenter mode. We are privileged and honored to have our students from Keaholua Scholars with us here today to share with us, and we ask our audience to be attentive and respectful. You will eventually be emailed a survey, which is also accessible on our Lā Honua website. We would like to receive your feedback about Lā Honua and your experience. And with that, I'll turn things over to Nalu and our presenters, who may choose to briefly introduce themselves. Mahalo again for your support in Lā Honua.
Mahalo, Darian, for that. Aloha, guys. I'm Nalu O'Connor, one of the moderators for today. I'm also the Keaholua STEM Scholars Program Coordinator at UH Hilo, where our panelists are mostly from. So I'm going to quickly introduce them, and then we'll kind of get started. Yeah, so mahalo for joining us. Our first panelist is Chloe Molou, who was born and raised in the country of Vanuatu. She is a current undergraduate marine science major at UH Hilo, who is working with the Mega Lab under the supervision of John Burns, where she produces 3D maps of tidal and environmental changes of fish ponds throughout Keaukaha. Aloha, Chloe. Our next panelist is Maikani Andres, who was born and raised in the Republic of Palau. She is currently pursuing her bachelor's degree in marine science at the University of Hawaiʻi at Hilo. Growing up in a community that heavily relies on marine resources, she grew up passionate about marine conservation. Having to experience the impacts of climate change firsthand, she decided to pursue a career that helps fight the impacts of climate change. Aloha, Maikani. Our next panelist is Kainalu Steward, who was born and raised on the western end of Maui in the parts of Lahaina and Ka'anapali. He graduated with his BA in Hawaiian Studies from UH Hilo and is currently a graduate student at the Tropical Conservation Biology and Environmental Science program at UH Hilo. One thing that connects his passion to climate change is his love for the places and people that have raised him and understand the impacts that climate change will have on our ecosystems and lifestyles. Aloha, Kainalu. Our final panelist is Fuamai Tago, who is a graduate this past fall of the University of Hawaiʻi at Hilo with a BS in Marine Science and is a native of America Samoa. During her time at Hilo, she analyzed the type of sargassum gremlins for outplanting projects at PACRAC under the supervision of Carla McDermott. Aloha, Fuamai. I think we're gonna turn this time now to our panelists and get going on the discussion. So if I can share my screen real quick. Shucks, sorry. Bear with me, bear with me. So one of our guiding questions today is, how has climate change affected you and your communities and your island communities throughout the Pacific? I'm gonna share my screen real quick because we have a quick PowerPoint presentation of where our students are coming from, yeah? Wait. So I think we're gonna turn it over to Chloe Molou, who is our first panelist for today. And she can kind of introduce herself and where she comes from. So I'm gonna turn it over to Chloe. Aloha, Chloe.
Aloha kako. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you everyone for joining. So as Nalu said, I'm Chloe Molou. I'm from Vanuatu, which is a small republic in the South Pacific, kind of found between Fiji and Australia. Vanuatu is one of the most at-risk countries for natural hazards. We get a lot of cyclones. We're in the Ring of Fire, so we get a lot of earthquakes. We got a lot of volcanoes. We're a volcanic chain. But one way that climate change has really affected Vanuatu in particular is just the intensification, the intensifying of cyclones and the increasing of their frequency. In 2010, our cyclone season was extended to 6 months out of the year. So it runs from April to November. And we usually average around 2 to 3 cyclones every season. And in the past decade, we've experienced 2 Category 5 cyclones. One in 2015, which was Cyclone Pam, which you can see in the left. Sorry, I realize it's not going to be very helpful if I say the left, but in the middle column of photos, it's the very center. That was Cyclone Pam in 2015, a Category 5 cyclone that I was at home for and experienced. And the one on the right is Cyclone Harold, which tore through in 2020. So while they were already dealing with the stresses of COVID-19, a Category 5 cyclone was not really the best add-on to that. But that's one way that Vanuatu has been really impacted and impacted by climate change. Yeah. I'm not sure if I should.
Yeah. Mahalo for, I forgot to add, just as we want this to be an open discussion. And if you guys have any questions, as our panelists are kind of talking, maybe just throw them down in the chat so that we can address them right away during this and kind of create an open dialogue. So yeah, does anybody have any questions for Chloe of her hometown or where she's, these types of impacts that are happening in Vanuatu? Oh yeah. Chloe, Stephen Colbert is asking, which island is your home?
So Efate Island is my home. I live in Port Vila, which is the capital city, which is pictured down in the bottom left corner. They have a crazy filter on it though, because they like to attract the tourists, but that is Port Vila, where I live. And on the map, I think you can see it, has got the Port Vila label next to it, sorry. But yeah, Efate Island is where I live. But my family is from Erromango, which is the island directly down from it.
We have another question too for you, Chloe. What has been some of the environmental changes you and your family seen over time that have impacted Vanuatu?
There's definitely been a lot of, we have a lot of fringing reefs, and a lot of them have been really impacted by just increasing temperature. So a lot of coral bleaching and just degradation in general has definitely been a really sort of obvious environmental change that we've seen, but also an increase in droughts and I'm trying to think of, yeah, I think those are sort of the biggest hitters for us, because a lot of our economy, but also just like livelihood, depend on agriculture and the ocean. And so those are some of the biggest impacts that we've had from those like environmental changes. I see the next question about Category 5 hurricanes. These are a new thing. Well, not really. We've had category 5 cyclones in the past, but they've definitely become more frequent in the most recent decade. Previously, it's been sort of category 1s or category 2, sort of like just general tropical depressions. But yeah, category 5 hurricanes are definitely becoming more frequent recently.
Getting some more questions.
Yeah, I can see. All right, so Fuamai, thank you. You asked about recovery from cyclones. So yeah, it was something that I was actually going to address later with one of our guiding questions, but a lot of our legislation and policy that looks at sort of climate adaptation has actually also been coupled with sort of disaster or like disaster management following these sort of these events. So our national NDMO, National Disaster Management Office, sort of looks after recovery after cyclones, but we also receive a lot of international aid from Australia and New Zealand, as well as the UK and China. And a lot of times that helps us be able to outreach to sort of more of the rural islands or further away islands to recover after cyclones. But yeah. And
there's another question that I got DM'd, and Basil's asking, what are some of the next or the steps that the government takes to address these issues or this natural issue?
Yeah, so like I had said earlier, a lot of our national policies and legislations that were, a lot of which were actually determined sort of in the, I think it was the early 2010s, but it's also sort of like the late 2000s, just more focused on like disaster risk management, because, you know, we are sort of one of the more at-risk countries for natural hazards. We understand that just like where we are. And we know that it's a focal point for us being able to bounce back after these disasters, because they're really inevitable for us. But now with the intensification of storms, and they're like, with them being more frequent and just more category 5 storms, I think a lot of legislation is just looking at, just better recovery after these events.
Mahalo nui for those answers, Chloe, and thank you for all the great questions. We really hope that we can, create dialogue around each student's home country, and just keep it an open dialogue as we kind of go throughout today. So mahalo, Chloe, for sharing where you're from and who you are as a person and what your community is going through. So we thank you for that. Our next panelist is Maikani Andres, who comes from Palau, and I'm gonna hand the mic over to her. Wait. Sorry, got a technical difficulty. Sorry. What is happening? Okay, Maikani.
Alim Yusel, Maikani Andres. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Maikani Andres, and I'm from the islands of Palau, which is the westernmost country in the Micronesian region. Where I come from, I think one of the impacts of climate change that we most definitely feel the effects of is sea level rise. As you can see in my little slide over here, the pictures on the two corners show a little neighborhood, and whenever we get really high tides, the water comes up to their porches, and in some cases, some people have had to move out of their house and relocate because of the water intruding their homes. The two pictures on the bottom that you see are what happens during spring tides, which is really, really high tides. and this is a little port in Koror. There are also buildings and houses there that when the water gets too high, it comes onto their lawn. In this case, it's the port. The picture that you see on the top right on the top with the lady, in her testimony, she lives in the rural areas of Palau, and in her testimony, she was saying that maybe like 20 years ago, like you could walk, you had to walk from their house on the beach all the way up to reach the waters. But then now the water has come up and is pretty close to their house, actually. One of the main things that Palauans do, like other Pacific Islanders, is go to the lo'i, the taro patches, yeah. And with sea level rise, we have the water coming in, intruding the taro patches, which affects the alkalinity of the soil, which in fact also affects the crops that the farmers harvest. There's a Palauan saying that says, which refers to the bilimbi tree, that if it's not shaken by wind, it will not bear fruit. And basically the meaning of this saying is that if we do not take action and stand up for the things that we feel and the impacts of climate change that we experience, like we are never going to get results. So yeah, that's just a little about me. Thank you.
Hello, Maikani. Does anybody have any like questions for Maikani and what Palau is kind of going through in her community? If not, we'll kind of move on to our next panelist. Thank you, Maikani.
Thank you.
My next panelist is Kainalu Steward, who hails from, well, I'm seeing some stuff coming in the chat. I can't see it though.
Sorry.
Go.
Chloe's asking, has sea level rise displaced many people in Palau?
Really good question. Thank you for that. I wouldn't say many as in thousands or maybe like hundreds, but I'd say like maybe like a good 200 people have had to like relocate their homes because of the rising sea level.
Mahalo for that. Does anybody else have any questions? If not, we're gonna move on to our next panelist, Kainalu.
We have a couple more that just came in.
Okay.
I was wondering, what is the total population of Palau?
Currently, the population of Palau is 18,000, but according to like recent surveys, we have like another like 5,000 Palauans that are not living on the island. Yeah.
Okay. And Gail says, I've been to Palau on several occasions and have noticed tourism increasing. How has the impact of tourism been regarding the environment?
Oh, thank you. Great question. Actually, one of the things that Palauans try to do is educate tourists on our environment. And that is what we've done is we established the Palau Pledge, which is when you come into Palau, you get this stamp that you have to sign. And it basically says that you don't take anything from the reefs, from anything from the environment. But yeah, tourism has had a big impact on our ecosystem. In terms of coral reefs, recent studies have revealed that in popular snorkeling and diving sites, we have more coral breakage. Within the Jellyfish Lake, one of our seven underwater wonders of the world, a recent study revealed that within the jellyfish, it had more sunscreen chemical levels than within the waters. And that's kind of what led to Palau advocating for using reef-safe sunscreen. Other impacts just include deforestation. Like one of the things we get is we get tourists, and then they come and then they want to build homes and stuff. So that's kind of one of the environmental changes that we see is deforestation to build more homes and more businesses. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
There's a lot more that came in too. So aside from sea level rise, what else have you seen is affecting Palau due to climate change? Fuamai asked.
Wildfires. You would never guess that in an island you get wildfires, but because it's so hot and Palau is like 7 degrees above the equator, we get wildfires within the hills of Babada, which is the rural areas. So that's another impact of climate change that we see.
And do people who have to relocate, are they forced to buy new lands? Are they getting help? And where are they going? Michelle's asking.
Yeah, we have government assistance for the people who do have to relocate because of sea level rise. Each state government has leases that individuals can apply for and build homes there. So that's kind of where they go. But besides that, I think one of the things about being a Palauan is that you have relatives everywhere. So you have homes everywhere. So yeah, like if people are not able to build homes, apply for leases and do stuff, they usually live with their relatives.
There's another question about the government response. So please correct me if I mispronounce your name, but Rolandon, how does the government respond to this? How does the government respond to the sea level rise? Is there any disaster management plan?
There is none that I am aware of, but wait, sorry, could you repeat the question?
How does the government respond, or how's the government response to the sea level rise? And are there any disaster management plans in place?
Okay, so we definitely do not have a disaster management plan, which I think is really sad, and we should definitely have one. But one way that the government is responding to climate change or the impacts of sea level rise is that we're advocating for it, especially in UN conferences, to try to influence the developed countries to see what small islands like Palau is experiencing, to try to like lessen the impacts of climate change, I guess. So, yeah.
And then we have one more. Does Palau plan on changing infrastructure to accommodate sea level rise?
Really good question. I don't think we are, because one thing that we are is we are very protective of our environment. So even little things like building infrastructures, it has to go through like this whole debate of the government and the people and the chiefs. It just even like rebuilding our new airport, it went through so much debate that we had to postpone it by a little. But yeah, I don't think we are planning on changing infrastructure.
Mahalo nui for those questions, and mahalo nui, Maikani, for opening our eyes to the things that are happening in your communities and your community at Palau. So mahalo for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next panelist is Kainalu Steward, and I'm gonna just hand the mic over to him. So mahalo.
And we got some good questions already coming in. But yeah, Velina mai kako, me ke aloha nui, o wau no o Kainalu Steward. he kamawao o Lā Honua o Pi'ilani, o Maui ku'umokupuni, o Lahaina a me Kaanapali ku'umaumoku, o Pu'ukukui ku'umauna, o Mala me Hono Kahua ku'umaukai. Aloha kako, mahalo for joining us today and being part of this conversation, and mahalo to those especially who put the hard work into to organize this conversation and the rest of the events that are happening this month. But yeah, my name is Kainalu Steward, originally from the island of Maui, where I was born and raised on parts of Ka'anapali as well as Lahaina, where you can see in the map where that arrow is pointing. And this picture in the middle is, you can see that beautiful stretch of coastline of Lahaina, kind of that panoramic view. And then if you're looking at the screen and if you go more towards your left side along the coast, you'll start to enter Ka'anapali. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to show some photos, I think, of our home, especially within this context of climate change and sort of show how it's affecting our communities. And these are some pictures from Lahaina as well as parts of Ka'anapali where a lot of coastal erosion is happening, and kind of along the lines of what Maikani was speaking about, the influx of sea level rise occurring more often, and how that's affecting our beaches and infrastructure. And so in these photos, you can see like seawalls, that one on the kind of lower left-hand side. And this seawall is actually built with sandbags, but they also have, I guess, different structures made from like concrete. But that's kind of been one way that more recently that they've been helping to mitigate, I guess, coastal erosion. But in recent years, I guess more so moving away from that as a mitigation, because it does sort of contribute to causing more erosion along our coastlines, because it stops that natural flow of sand and sediment that helps grow our beaches. And then you can see in the photos below, the one in the very bottom right corner, we actually only have really one highway to get to Lahaina from the other side of the island that most people use daily, unless you go around the back way, which we call around the back way of the island, which takes a lot longer. So not many people take that way, but you can see the water starting to wash up on our roadways. And so that's kind of been a problem as well recently. And especially in the summertime, you know, with a lot of south and southwest swells that hit the side of our island in combination with king tides that are happening more often. And so we get these large swells of waves that begin to wash up on our shore. And so that's even another thing that that's in the talks of even kind of migrating or moving our roadways to higher ground. And then the picture in the middle, or bottom middle, I guess, is of Ka'anapali Beach, and this place is heavily really a tourist destination. And so this coastline is mostly hotels, condos, and shops. And this is another area that they're kind of prioritizing in mitigation efforts. And one of those efforts, I guess, is called beach renourishment, where they basically pump sand from offshore areas onto the beach to stretch the beach or coastline, basically. And so, yeah, I guess that's another effort, but there's also been a lot of concern and kind of pushback, I guess, from the local and native community, because we know that this is to really benefit the tourist industry, and our concerns are really is how's that going to affect these places that we go to gather food or for recreational purposes. And so, and then this is just a picture of me on my surfboard, and I wanted to include that because I think when I think of climate change, a lot of it is influenced from my relationship that I've had growing up with the ocean, and I think a lot of us on this, or all of us on this panel, think of how climate change will mainly affect our coastlines and our oceans because of our upbringing. And so, yeah, I just wanted to include that photo. And then also this Olelo no Ea, or Hawaiian proverb, we were all kind of asked to include something that we sort of hope to live by, or sort of inspire to move into the future in this context of climate change. And I thought this is a perfect one, and I to kind of talk about, which is he wa'a he moku, he moku he wa'a, which literally translates to canoe is our island, and an island is our canoe. And I think our kupuna, they're so smart because they made these metaphorical connections, you know, viewing our island as a canoe. And when they're preparing to go for these long voyages, they have to make sure that they had everything that they need to sustain them for these long journeys, whether that was food, water, material to patch cells or whatever it may be. But more importantly, they knew that they have to bring the right people, and that it was gonna take each other to get there. And so I think within this saying, that's a reflection of us as a people living on an island, that we have to work together and really malama or care for our resources, because what we need and what is and all we have is on our island, from Maka to Makai. And so if we have that mindset moving forward, I think we'll be able to adapt better as climate changes. And you know, our kupuna, they always viewed the climate as changing, and I guess nowadays it's more viewed as a hazardous or a disastrous thing that's happening, but they knew that things were always constantly changing and adapting. And so, but then again, their lifestyles are very different than us today. So yeah, that's kind of my brief introduction. And I think we wanted to answer the question, why is climate change important to you, within this intro slide. So I guess thinking of that, my first thoughts are related to how it's affecting, like I said, our oceans and coastlines. And growing up, I always spent my free time surfing or just being near on the water, whether that was like paddling or even paddling canoe, fishing, or just enjoying with family and friends. And so I think climate change is important to me because it will affect the places that I grew up loving, and really the places that have raised me in turn affect our lifestyles and cultural practices. And I also think in the context of my current work in research that I've been introduced and mentored by Dr. Haunani Kane through my graduate studies, where we use science and technology such as geospatial software to better understand our shorelines and how our island systems adapt to changes such as sea level rise or hurricane impacts. And so I think just doing this work and having a relationship with our ocean and coastlines through growing up in West Maui has given me more meaning and inspiration to explore ways that research will help us adapt to these changes. And if you notice, all of these wonderful women on this panel are marine science majors, and that explains a lot, you know, because where we come from, we're interested in returning home and helping our communities, and how can we use higher education to support our communities. So yeah, I think the big picture is climate change is important to me because I care about these coastal and marine systems that support our communities and families, and has fed us for generations in multiple ways, whether it's physically, mentally, or spiritually. And yeah, I'm super grateful to just be here with the other panelists today.
Mahalo for that, Kainalu. Does anybody have any questions for Kainalu or his island community, or where he comes from, about his island community?
Drew has a question. Do you think that the removal of undersea sand off the coast to replenish the beaches disrupts sea currents, water quality, marine life, or anything else in the immediate area?
Yeah, mahalo for that question. That's a great question, and that's actually one of the main concerns that a lot of the local and Hawaiian communities that frequent these coastlines have is people, especially that fish and dive. They know they have certain grounds such as what we call moi grounds, or
where they go to for this certain fish during a certain season, and they dwell in these areas that they're going to be taking this sand from. And so their question is, you know, same as you, how is taking sand from these areas going to affect their migration patterns, or are they going to be able to recognize these spaces the same way that they usually do? And I think another concern is when you remove sand, what is that process in between? Like, is that sedimentation, some of that going to end up in our nearshore reefs and going to clog up our reef system? So, or even water quality, like you said, affecting the turbidity, or how I guess clear and clean the water will be for marine life as well as us humans. So yeah, I think it's definitely gonna affect all of those. And so it's sort of this what outweighs the other, I guess, in terms of protecting our coastlines, but also in a way that's doing it ethically and responsibly.
I actually have a question for you. I'm just kind of formulating it, so I'll try to ask it in a non-confusing way. And it's kind of a big question too. But basically, do you think that, and I know this is kind of controversial, like in sustainability and also here, do you think that sustainable tourism is possible? And if it is, how do you think that would look? Because I know you touched on a lot, like, you know, the effects of not sustainable and like harmful tourism on Maui and throughout all the islands. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think especially for Hawaii and especially for Maui, because a lot of the tourists end up, when they do go to Maui, they end up on the west end of Maui. And so I think sustainable tourism personally is definitely moving in the right direction than just, I guess, regular tourism. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I guess I don't really know. For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the tourism industry at all. And so I would like to see ways that we can support our economy and our people and our communities rather than heavily relying on tourism. But one way I guess I was thinking of how ways that tourists can also contribute sustainably to our places and homes is, I know that in other Pacific Island countries or nations, they have like a green fee, or like where they charge tourists a certain amount of money that will go back to giving back to organizations or stewardship agencies to better manage our places. So I think that could be one way that we could sustainably both support our economy, but also the places that we live in. So I hope that answered your question.
That was great, mahalo.
Yes, I agree with Shu. We have to support climate change mitigation and adaptation, or adaptation.
Yeah, if there's no other questions for Kainalu, we mahalo you for sharing about Lahaina and Ka'anapali and Maui and what your community is going through over there. And I think we can kind of transition to our last panelist, Fuamai Tago. So I now pass it on to Fuamai. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Nalu. Talofa, my name is Fuamai Tago and I'm from American Samoa. And as you can see here, I put up a lot of different pictures because I wasn't sure what I should talk about from American Samoa. So I was like, why can't I talk about all of them? Or just some, just pinpoint some. So listening to everybody's story and their different backgrounds, it's obvious that the Pacific region is undergoing some changes due to climate change. And here are some pictures identifying the things that American Samoa is going through. So I got two pictures about the seawalls, coral bleaching, our lo'i, our taro field, sea level rise, and the fish, or our culture as well. So I do have some indirect and direct effects due to climate change. So, sorry, I'm kind of nervous. Okay. I didn't really think about climate change much when I was little, but when I first entered college and majored in marine science, it got to me like I should just wake up and realize that climate change is actually real. One personal story that really saddens me most was coral bleaching. And as you can see in the picture over here, this was from February 2014 to December 2015. And that was, as you can see, it's like a really huge bleaching event. Corals are really interesting to me though. They serve a lot of purposes for American Samoa, such as a protective barrier for our island. Here's like here's a map of our island, but in reality, we're just like a little dot on the world map. So all these changes from climate change really is sad. So back to my story, coral bleaching. I didn't really think much about it until I majored in marine science, and learning about all the different corals on our island, the multiple scientific names of fish. I was like, oh, all these things kind of relate to each other. So without the corals, we lose our fisheries, if that makes sense. So like all our fish, in all the islands, we depend on the ocean to kind of help us survive. And with the changes in climate change, it kind of, it just kind of changes we lose some of our plants, our animal species, and not only coral bleaching, but also with the extreme weathers that we're experiencing right now. And you can see that right here with the seawalls. So with sea level rise, we kind of start to need to change our infrastructures, and we settled on seawalls. And not only the sea level rise, but also like heavy rainfalls. And then you can see the picture below. And like I said, we needed to change our infrastructure, and that cost like a lot of millions of money, millions of dollars for us to ask the United States to help us out. And also the taro field, this one is in Onu'u. And one personal story I realized that I learned from them was Onu'u, they depend on this taro field for their livelihood. And it's like it grows in kind of like a swamp. And so like Maikani said, with the sea level rise, it kind of intrudes into that little swamp, and it kind of just changes the alkalinity. And on top of that, how is climate change affecting our culture? With the rising temperatures, it results into the changes in our fish production, our loss of mangroves, which is another breeding ground. And also some people are needing it increases the dispersal of our Samoan population to relocate other places as well. And my last slide, I have this saying that I got from a friend, which kind of, climate change is like a negative, like you can see it as in a negative way, but with our community talking to each other with the voice from their different experiences, we maybe can like just voice out our opinions to see what other people have, like what their, how do you say it, like their inputs to help us, like as a community, as a Pacific region ourselves, we need to like come together and like communicate to each other to kind of figure out a way to adapt to these places, to adapt to the changes, sorry. So the saying is, which can be translated into like, changes affecting our island, we should have a say. Thank you.
Alo Fuamai for for telling us what your community is going through and giving us a little insight to what's happening in America and Samoa. So mahalo for that. Does anybody have any questions for Fuamai? And what's happening in her island community? If we don't really have any questions for Fuamai, I think we're gonna kind of transition into our discussion and our dialogue between the panelists to kind of just compare and contrast the island communities and how they're kind of dealing with climate change. So I'm gonna pass it over to Darian for one of our questions for the panel.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think someone has their hand raised.
Yeah, I think Lisa has her hand raised. Lisa, do you have a question for Fuamai?
I'm so sorry, I don't. I just want to say though that to all the panelists that I really appreciate their wisdom on this and sharing out about this really important topic and what's going on in their community. So thanks to everybody who put this together and everybody who's on the panel.
Dale is also asking about, so you had photos of the canary. How has the presence of the canary, how does the presence of the canary affect the environment in American Samoa?
It's canaries. It's cannery.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, thank you, Gail, for the question. The cannery, it has changed the environment, like with all their, they have, sorry. Okay. The cannery has helped us a lot in, not in terms of environment though, but like economic purposes. So that's one of the canneries, like the most, it hires like about 1,500 people on our island, and most of our people depend on that cannery to serve for their livelihood. In terms of environment, there have been some changes with their, like when they have accidents, such as like the oil spills within that area, it just changes like the alkalinity and anything that deals with our and the fish species in that area. How has climate change impacted the fish for the county? Oh, great question. Climate change, as I said before, sorry, climate change, as I said before, has like affected our fishery with the rising temperatures resulting in the fish production. And so lately we have seen like a decline in our catches, and that's affecting like the, how do you say, it's like the speed, if you can get it, like how fast we're trying to produce a lot of products. Have there been a lot of oil spills from the cannery? Not really, but when they do have accidents, which is, I wouldn't say rarely, but not a lot as well. Does that answer your question, Chloe? It's like in between, like not all the time, but not as little as well.
Good job. Good job, panelists. All right, so we're going to go to our next question. And this one's a little bit deeper on what you folks were touching on. So do you feel like climate change affects your cultural practices or even cultural identity? If so, how and why? Jump in when you can.
Good. Try to jump in. I would say definitely, you know, climate change is directly related to our natural environment, which is directly related to us as Hawaiian or Pacific people. So undoubtedly it affects our culture, practices, and identity, I think. And so everything we did in practice before, in Kawakahiko or the olden times, whether environmentally or politically, was in relation with the land and its seasonal changes. So I think climate change will definitely affect the productivity and abundance of our places, which will kind of in turn, you know, affect people that still rely on our coastlines or reefs, for example, to put food on the table. And I even think of our traditional food practices such as lokui'a or fish ponds, and lo'ikalo or taro farming, and where we rely on the health of our ecosystems to produce healthy food. And so some questions I have is like, how will sea level rise affect the productivity of fish ponds because there's an imbalance of salinity to fresh water? Or how will the increase or decrease of rainfall affect our waterways and its ability to provide nutrients to our lo'ikalo or lokui'a? But in terms, I guess, of whether climate change will affect our identity, I think my hope is that we will only, or it will only strengthen our identity because it's inextricably linked to our environment. And so I think our identity can be strengthened through practices such as learning our language and reconnecting with Aina, for example. But yeah, mahalo for that question.
I can jump in. I think that yes, climate change really does impact our culture. Like Kainalu was saying with coral bleaching, yeah, I think. In my experience, the reefs that I used to snorkel and dive as a child are now bleached. The reefs that I used to fish, which was like behind my backyard, me and my dad used to go fishing there. We can't go fishing there anymore because there's no fish. The taro patches that me and my mom used to go to, we can't go because the water is intruding the taro patches, which changes the alkalinity, and then therefore our crops cannot grow. And I don't think the impacts of climate change is enough to diminish our cultural practices, because like other people have said, as Pacific Islanders, we are resilient, yeah. Like we are able to take on the challenges that we face, and therefore we are able to adapt. But it does affect the livelihoods of some people, especially back home in Palau. We have people who mainly depend on their taro patches to sell their crops for money. And we have people who only fish for income. So yeah, it does impact people, like people's livelihoods, but I don't think it's strong enough to diminish our culture and our identity. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go off what Maikani just said about like diminishing our cultural identity. I think recently I've had a lot of conversation. I mean, like with this panel as well. But I've had a lot of conversations recently, just sort of about like taking a new perspective really on like climate change. I think in a lot of these changes are really dangerous and really disastrous and are like directly impacting a lot of people like really negatively. But I think also a lot of these changes have like highlighted the resiliency of like just indigenous nations and like and people in general, because, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. And like a lot of these changes and our ability to adapt to them just kind of like don't know, highlights our strength in that respect and our connection to our place. So yeah, scary times right now, but I think we're doing a resiliency. So very proud. So I think in some respect, in a lot of respects, it does affect our cultural identity and just our connection to place. But I think we can also see it as like, not testing our resiliency, but almost, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'll just jump off of what you guys are saying. Like what Kainalu said about how climate change is affecting our kalo, not only that, but everything our livelihood depends on, as well as what Maikani was telling us about. Like some people, they fish, just fish for their livelihood, and some people, they farm. And so, yeah, climate change really has affected us, but like what Chloe was saying, they're really testing our resiliency. And that goes back to what I was saying, to the quote I was giving you. So when changes come, we should have a say. And so with all of us together, communicating about what we're going through and finding adaptations to these things, we have been going through it for a long time, and we're just really adapting to them. And yeah, they're testing. Climate change is testing and has tested our resiliency, but we're still catching up to it. More like look on it on the bright side as well.
Mahalo, and thank you so much for all of your beautiful responses. And so with touching upon that, I next want to ask, what are your communities doing to adapt to climate change? You know, since we're here at UH Hilo and Fuamai, you're just getting started, right? So I would love to hear what your communities are doing right now, or what they have been doing.
Thank you. Mostly what we've been doing for like a long time is just education. Well, not only that, but we are trying to bring back local knowledge mixed together with our scientific knowledge to kind of find ways to deal with these problems or vulnerability. And we also are, doing lots of research, such as assessing our vulnerability to our risk to these extreme weathers, and just coordinate policies and efforts to try to work and support agencies that are trying to figure out ways or adaptation plans to kind of deal with climate change. Along with that, we're also collecting data. Yeah, we're also collecting data and just using that to also support the thing I was talking about bringing local knowledge, mixed it together with our scientific knowledge to kind of deal with this. Thank you.
I think a lot of Vanuatu's work in sort of climate adaptation they've done a lot of work for sort of coastal hazard management because because we are islands, and with sea level rise and intensifying storms, our coastlines get battered, and with fringing reefs kind of like in decline, and with sort of with mangroves as well, sort of being subject to like deforestation. A lot of time, like our coasts are just kind of in shambles. And so a lot of the projects have been looking at protection and management of those areas. And also just for agricultural purposes too, just because a lot of agricultural land is along the coast. And with sea level rise, like it is for the lo'i patches, like in Palau or in Samoa and Hawaii, like the soil alkalinity is affected by that sea level rise. So a lot of our work has gone into coastal hazard management and protection.
Maikani or Kainalu?
Yeah, I can try to give this one a shot, but yeah, I guess along kind of what I was talking about earlier, some mitigation things that Lahaina has been doing in terms of physical impacts. What is things such as planning with the county. Sorry, one moment, my battery's gonna, oh, never mind. Sorry, I thought my battery was gonna die from my computer. But yeah, I was saying physical, so seawalls, or beach nourishment projects. But I also think like in general, within Hawaii, across Hawaii, many communities are starting to do aina restoration, you know, connect with their places and outplant food or native species, restore waterways. And so I think those are also ways that our community is adapting, is by reconnecting through our land and uncovering mo'olelo or stories of these places that tell us its function or characteristics. And I think knowing those stories and reclaiming that will only strengthen us in the future, you know. And that kind of relates to, I think, another way that I like to see we're mitigating climate change that we don't always think about is the revitalization of our language, our Hawaiian language. You know, as we know, language shapes the way we think, behave, and engage with our surrounding landscapes. And so I think this new generation of first language speakers who know the language of their land and culture, they in turn have a better understanding and relationship, I think, with their natural environment and how to malama or care for these spaces. So as I said, like, for example, within our language, we're able to know the function and characteristics of that particular exchange or processes within our natural environments. And so I think to understand our aina, we need to speak the language of the land and listen to what it is telling us. And I think our idea today of being sustainable is embedded in our native languages and within that worldview of how to reciprocate our actions with our surrounding environments. And yeah, like a great example I think of is something that one of my mentors, Kamala Anthony, who is a kia'i or steward at Honokea, Lokui'a and Keaukaha, that she shared with me is that concept or word of lawai'a, which roughly translates to a fisherman, but if we break the word up, lava meaning enough or satisfied, and i'a, of course, meaning fish. And so within this term, we know our responsibility that when we gather fish, that we only take enough for what we need. And so yeah, I think just revitalizing our native languages across the globe is part of this greater movement to steward our places better. And I think it's a mitigation effort that we don't always necessarily think about as one. So wanted to just highlight that and cackle what everyone else said.
Thank you for the really good question. I think what Palau's been doing on a global scale, Palau really tries to advocate for climate change, especially in UN conferences. So we've had our president and ambassadors speak at the UN conferences in terms of climate change and the impacts that it has on small islands. Because the thing is, we feel the impacts of climate change, yet I don't think we cause climate change, because like we all know that climate change is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases, yeah. So what Palau is trying to do is try to influence the developed countries who emit more greenhouse gases to lessen the greenhouse gases that they're emitting, yeah. But what we're also trying to do is, we're not trying to get them to pity us. We're just trying to get them to see what we see, you know? And that's like Palau trying to help other Pacific Islanders like Hawaiians and people from American Samoa and Vanuatu and Marshall Islands, you know. But on a more local scale, Palau does more education and outreach stuff, not just for locals, but we also try to educate our tourists on the importance of our environment. And like I mentioned previously with our Palau pledge, it's a really nice thing. Like you land in Palau, you get this stamp in your passport, and it says that I pledge to protect the environment and not take from the reefs and stuff and whatnot. And you have to sign it. And it basically gives the tourist the obligation to protect the environment and not harm it in any way during their stay. But yeah, besides that, I think that's what Palau is trying to do to fight the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Mahalo for all your great answers. I know that we're kind of coming to the ending of our panel discussion, but we have one more question because we kind of been focusing on our, you know, the things that have been happening in our island communities because of climate change, but we kind of want to focus on the resiliency, the aspect of hope. Yeah. So this is our last question for our panelists to kind of answer. So what are the hopes for your island communities kind of coming into the future? And how are you going to be a part of that change? And I just want to open it up to our panelists. Mahalo.
Can go first. I think my hope for our island community is that we'll come together, you know, collectively, do our part where we can, because we know everyone has a function, and through this, hopefully, we will become a stronger community, because we'll realize that we need each other to care for our homes, and if we want to leave this better, or this place better for those who come after us. And my hope to be a part of that change my hope is to be a part of that change in multiple aspects, I guess, whether it's my academic career, using research to help us explore ways to adapt, promoting our language within family and our community, or being a contributing member to our community in whatever capacity that may look like, you know, whether it's joining in on workday the wonderful workdays that they have planned throughout this month. But yeah, and so I think, like mentioned earlier, we all have a function and something to bring to the table. And so if we can see purpose in that work, then we can be a part of that change, because it's going to take us all to adapt. And mahalo.
I'll jump in. Yeah. I'm just going to go off of what Kainalu was saying. Yeah, I think everybody coming together as a community is really important. And, you know, we all do have a function. And I was just messaging it earlier, take care of the Aina and it will take care of us. So yeah, just taking care of our island. And, you know, we were talking about it earlier, resiliency. We have been going through it. All our islands have been going through it. And we're just trying to adapt to the changes. So yeah, coming together is a really good way in going back to our local knowledge, you know, promoting those things, as well as educating our younger generations to see and realize that it's actually happening, and we just need to move forward and try to adapt to the changes as well, but still keeping our local knowledge together. And I do hope to become, I do hope to become a part of that whole change. As a recent graduate, I want to use my educational background to be a part of this, as we in different aspects like academic, doing outreach, research, and just being part of, as well as be part of this community and introducing our community, which is kind of like closed-minded to some other works, to kind of open up to the changes. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely, sorry.
Go first. No, you go first.
Thanks, Betty. Yeah, I definitely share the same like sentiments as both Fuamai and Kainalu. But yeah, I think what I hope really for Vanuatu is just that we continue to grow and adapt with these changes and just become, I don't know, a stronger, yeah, definitely just a stronger community. And I really hope to be a part of that change. I think it was why I came to school, why I'm majoring in marine science. I think for a lot of us, that's true. In STEM, I can't speak for the other panelists, but like becoming a marine scientist was one of the ways that I wanted to be able to contribute really at all at home during these, I don't know, during these changing times. But yeah, I'm hoping I can be a part of those efforts in any way I can.
I think like what the other panelists were saying in terms of hopes for our community, I think that definitely coming together is definitely going to make an impact, not just like nation by nation, but like the whole Pacific Island, like the Pacific, all the Pacific Islands, like the Pacific's pretty big. Like we have a really big voice if we all do come together, you know? I think that's like one way that we can make an impact. How I hope to be a part of this change, not just through my educational background, because a part of why I wanted to major in marine science is to help fight the effects of climate change, you know. But I think also a really great way to be a part of that change is the internet. Like the power of the internet still amazes me. Like I went from having to go to an internet cafe to access the internet to having to be able to access it from my home in my room. Like, and just seeing like the impacts of like what the internet can do. I think that's a really great way to advocate for climate change, you know, like people are online a lot. Like you post things, you post facts, you don't post fake news. You post facts about climate change and people will listen. And you could do that through like making a vlog or sharing your Instagram stories about climate change and stuff. But yeah, I think that's what I hope to do. Like not just impact like local Pacific Islanders, but also like the world to see what climate change does to us. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Mahalo for all those beautiful answers of how your island communities are, you know, thriving and being resilient and building a movement on hope. Yeah. So thank you for, you know, you really opened my eyes in a lot of ways to how climate change is kind of affecting our island communities, but also what are the solutions and how do we adapt and how do we just be ourselves, right? And connect to our cultures and our identity. So mahalo across the Moana Nui a Kea for those answers, those beautiful answers and solutions that you gave to us. So that kind of closes us out today. I want to respect everybody's time. Mahalo for coming today. It's 1:15. I really want to thank our panelists. We couldn't have done it without you guys. You guys are the experts of your communities. You are all awesome people, and I'm super glad to know you guys and be a part of your guys' life. So mahalo for joining us today and being our experts on this topic. Yeah. We also want to thank the Lā Honua Symposium, Uncle Drew, Auntie Michelle. We really want to thank you guys for setting all of this up and having us a part of your conversation, your dialogue throughout the month of Lā Honua or Malama Honua or Mahina Honua, whatever you call it. Yeah, so mahalo. I also want to thank our moderators, Anya and Darian. You guys did an awesome job. Thank you for being a part of this and kind of helping all of this kind of run throughout the time. And thank you guys for bearing with me and with all my technical difficulties. So I think that's going to kind of round us out. Maybe the panelists could stay on a little longer if anybody has any other questions. If anybody wants to add anything else, we're open to it, yeah, and we'll stay online to kind of just talk story. But that kind of rounds it out today. Mahalo everybody for coming and sharing your time with us and listening to the stories of our people. So mahalo. Thank you guys.
Hey, I had a question. Especially because it's great that we have so many ladies here talking about their experiences and so many different cultures represented too. Are there ways in which women are impacted differently from men with climate change, going into how those cultural differences are experienced?
That is a really good question. And we're all just like sitting and pondering it because the answer is yes. But to be able to expand on that will take some time.
One thing that jumped to my mind was, I'm sure you guys know, you know how like the ladies in olden times, or like not olden, but like the ladies would always go out to the ocean and they would just like collect what's like the stale from the ocean, like just on the coastline. So with climate change, yeah, but like the little tiny one, I forgot, was it in Opili or something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there. So like when the ladies would go out there, you know, it's on the coastline, right? So with the sea level rise, it just changes that whole area, and sea level rise leads to infrastructures of the seawalls, and bam, our area is kind of changing. So the ladies would have to relocate to another area to kind of go do their fishing or their traditional practices on the other side.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. Is that a lot of, I don't know if the rain is really loud or not in the mic.
You're okay.
Okay. A lot of women at home are, well, agriculture is a really big industry for us, and a lot of Vanuatu women sort of rely on that because we have really big markets in the capital, but we also have a lot of exports, and so especially like after cyclones, it takes so long for crops to regrow, but also have enough to be able to take to market to sell. And so a lot of these disturbances just really affect livelihood on that level, like just affecting how they can support their families, how they can support themselves, especially for people who like live outside of the urban center and just and are just subsistence farmers or fishers. And so yeah, that's how I know a lot of women are able to make their money, and so yeah, that's one way that they're kind of like disproportionately impacted.
Well, Dr. C, good to see you.
I
just wanted to add to that question. That's a great question, because yeah, climate change will definitely have an effect, I think, on our social systems and the roles that we play in our communities, more so in places that are more rural. Not as, you know, obviously in Hawaii where it's a different story, but I just thought of a project that I did in one of my anthro classes where I was researching women in fisheries in Fiji, and with their traditions and culture, the women in Fiji are really, I guess, leading the way in the subsistence areas, because their roles are mainly nearshore fisheries, and so they're in charge of harvesting things such as limu or shellfish from the intertidal zone and everything that's sort of within the reef system. And then they say that the men are usually in charge of harvesting the pelagic fishes. And so the women are also, they aren't just the people that harvested and gather these things, but they're also the people that are selling them in the markets and working for their families to provide economic stability and food on the table for their families. And so that just got me to think with your question of how, yeah, climate change, such as sea level rise, will affect their roles and ability to provide, I guess, for their families. And so, yeah, it's gonna be really crucial. And I think that's also something as scientists who study physical impacts have to also incorporate social scientists into our work, because the two systems are interconnected.
Yeah. That's great. That's very similar to what Fuamai was talking about with, or similar to that with the ladies going out and harvesting those reef resources, and simply having that access and having to move and changes that come along with all that. Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you. You all did a fantastic job today. It was just really great to hear your stories. Thank you for sharing.